Hey guys, tonight we're going deep beneath the shimmering floors of a Persian palace, literally. You're lying on your back in the dark, packed in among bricks and gravel, your nose filled with the smell of lime dust and mold. Your arms are pinned at your sides. Your mouth is gagged with old cloth that tastes like horse sweat and pomegranate. And above you, stone slabs. A palace courtyard. Footsteps echo, muffled, of people casually walking over your head unaware. Or worse, totally aware that you're part of the architecture. You are, quite literally, the foundation of empire, and you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is there. I love seeing how far this sleepy caravan travels. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't know how long it's been since they laid the last paving stone above you. The workers, skilled stonemasons imported from Bactria and Susa, moved with shocking speed. They say the Persians built their empire with efficient cruelty and endless manpower, and you're experiencing both firsthand. This punishment, it isn't even new. It's ancient when Darius the Great uses it. It's older than Cyrus. The idea is simple: if someone defies the king, they become a physical part of his greatness. Your breath may fog the soil for now, but soon, you'll be a compacted myth beneath the boots of visiting nobles. Some historians argue whether this punishment was ceremonial or practical. Was it used to reinforce religious warnings, or just to silence someone forever? Either way, it works. You're silent, and very much wishing you'd never opened your mouth at that council meeting. What did you even say? Something about tax grain quotas being optimistically false. You thought it was a joke. The court didn't laugh. Now your ribs ache from the compression. Not enough to kill you fast. Of course, that would be merciful. Instead, they've given you a tiny clay pipe, barely wider than your pinky, that feeds some air to your cramped chamber. Occasionally, someone drips water down it. Once, someone poured in wine. That was a mistake. The wine attracted ants. Now, they live with you. You have names for them. As the hours blur into each other, you start to imagine what's happening above. Dancers twirl in linen robes. Zoroastrian priests chant under the moonlight. The satrap of Lydia is arguing with someone about carpets. And the queen, she's stepping over your chest in gold-threaded sandals, sipping chilled rosewater, maybe giggling at something. One of her handmaidens whispered. She's lovely. You hope she never finds out you exist. Sometimes, the ground vibrates with music. Not drums, something deeper. Like 100-foot zither being plucked by the mountains themselves. You feel every note echo in your sternum. It's beautiful. In a completely humiliating sort of way. You are the resonating chamber. You are the living bass line for a party you weren't invited to. According to one Greek account, possibly exaggerated, possibly not an advisor to Xerxes, was once punished this way for suggesting the king shouldn't invade Greece by sea. It was strategically unsound. He said. Xerxes agreed, and then buried him under the command platform so he could feel the tides of glory firsthand. Irony, it seems, is not lost on the Achaemenids. You try not to panic, but panic is the only thing left on the menu. Your fingers are asleep. Your legs have stopped reporting in. You're becoming one with the foundation. And not in the spiritual sense. There's a rhythmic creaking above some kind of mechanical contraption, followed by the unmistakable stomp of a bored noble's ceremonial elephant. Great. They're rehearsing for the New Year parade. The vibration knocks a pebble loose. It rolls across your cheek like a tiny stone tear. You used to laugh at superstitions. You mocked the idea that foundations needed living offerings. Now you wonder, how many poor souls are packed under the staircase? Beneath the throne. Maybe even baked into the walls. In Elamite ruins, they found skeletons tucked into old clay blocks, curled up like sad construction mascots. Historians still argue whether those remains were victims or volunteers, sacrifices, or honor-bound builders seeking eternal service. You could have been a good builder, but you had opinions. The air in the clay pipe grows warm and stale. Someone must have draped silk over the end again. You hear muffled laughter, then a cough, then the scuff of slippers. Occasionally, children peer down the pipe and whisper curses. You curse back. It's not mature, but it's something. Every so often, you try to move. It hurts. Your right hand is trapped against something sharp, maybe a broken tile. You wiggle your fingers until they bleed, just to remind yourself you're still here. You once read about a man in the western provinces, Armenia, maybe who survived 10 days in burial. They dug him up out of guilt, only to rebury him for surviving improperly. You're not planning on making that mistake. You drift in and out of half-sleep, the kind that flirts with dreams, but never stays. You imagine climbing out of the soil, dirt sloughing off your limbs like molted skin. You walk calmly into the throne room, covered in dust, and sit beside the king like nothing happened. How are the foundations, you ask? He nods solemnly, sipping wine, and says, stable. For now. A beetle crawls across your neck. You don't bother brushing it off. You're past caring. It's probably a palace beetle eats gold. Poops. Incense. You consider befriending it. Call him Darius Jr. The pipe bubbles suddenly. Someone's pouring liquid again. You tilt your head and taste it thin barley water. Not bad. A little grainy. Possibly poisoned. But hey, you are thirsty. You give a weak thumbs up into the dark, hoping someone sees it. Eventually, the party ends. The footsteps fade. The moonlight slips from the cracks above. You are alone again, with the ants and the silence. But something new stirs inside you. Not hope exactly, but a grim sort of pride. You are history now. Future tourists will walk above and say, "Did you know they used to bury people under palaces?" Wild. Maybe a kid will drop a coin through the pipe. You'll swallow it out of spite. The walls press in tighter. The clay around your legs is setting. You smile grimly into the dark. You always wanted to be part of something big. You just didn't expect it to be this literal. Ash coats your tongue before you even open your eyes. You cough dry. Raspy. A bark in the void, and the flakes float like tiny gray feathers into the stale air. Your lips are cracked. Your nose bleeds faintly. And still they bring more. Another bowl of ash, set gently on the stone floor by a servant who doesn't meet your gaze. A touch of ceremony and a punishment meant to erase you slowly. And, thoroughly, the guards in their ornate patterned sashes stand at a distance. They're there to watch, not help. They lean on their spears and chat about chariot races, unconcerned that you're hunched like a dying goat in the corner of a Babylonian storeroom, eating the remains of burnt scrolls. broken idols, and bones ground into dust. This is the sentence for defiling sacred knowledge. At least that's what the high priest screamed before they gagged him with his own prayer beads. The rules were never clear. Perhaps you asked the wrong question in the temple archives. Perhaps you touched a tablet meant for the divine. Or perhaps, and this is the most likely, you were simply too curious, too literate, and in the wrong scroll room at the wrong hour. Now, you get to chew philosophy until your teeth fall out. The bowl contains a mix of materials, some fine and gray like fireplace soot, some granular like crushed lentils, others white and powdery bone. Probably cow, human. You try not to ask. You chew with your back molars. Slowly. Eyes watering. There's a faint metallic aftertaste, like licking old copper coins. Your stomach flips. Unsure whether to digest or revolt. One of the guards smirks. Better than boiled lizard. He jokes. His friend laughs. You briefly consider lunging at them. But your legs gave up hours ago. It's not that they beat you. They don't need to. The diet handles that for them. Every time you stand, your knees wobble like reeds in a swamp breeze. Historians still argue whether this punishment was symbolic or purely punitive. Was it meant to purge intellectual pride? Or was it just an economical way to erase scribes without beheading them in public? There's also some debate over what exactly was in the ash bowl. A few records suggest the ashes came from specific sacred fires, while others hint at less poetic origins: chamber, pot scrapings, garbage fire remains, maybe even old mummies. The truth is likely some horrific mix, topped with ceremonial spice. The room you're in is damp. The walls sweat, even when you don't. Mold blooms in the corners. You're not sure if it's night or day. There's a single high window with bars, too small for anything but birds and moonlight. On your third day at least, you think it's the third someone tosses in a clay jar of water? You crack it open like treasure, licking the inside clean. One of the guards whistles an old hymn while you drink. You hate him. In your more lucid moments, you dream of real food: fresh dates, oiled bread, honeyed lentils. You once had roasted lamb, so tender you wept. Now, you weep from chewing on calcified history. Sometimes the ash catches in your throat, and you hack it back up, spattering gray saliva across your lap. The guards wrinkle their noses, but never intervene. You meet another prisoner briefly, an old woman accused of spitting during a purification ceremony. She's missing 3 teeth and most of her memory. They place her beside you, and she hums lullabies from some far province. She eats the ash without complaint. Her tongue is black. She calls you priest, even when you correct her. You stop correcting her. Then, one morning, she's gone. No sound. No farewell. Just an empty smear on the stones where she used to sit. At one point, you notice something peculiar in the ash: a small, curled piece of gold leaf. You hold it up, eyes wide. The guards don't notice. You turn it over in your fingers. A fragment of something once sacred, now digested into this dusty punishment. You press it into your palm, then tuck it under your tongue for safekeeping. It tastes of nothing, but it feels like memory. You start hallucinating, or at least, you think they're hallucinations. A dog walks into the storeroom, silent, with glowing eyes. It watches you for an hour, then leaves. A snake slithers past your bowl and coils near your ankle, breathing in time with your pulse. No one else reacts. You decide not to either. One evening, a priest enters. Not one of the chatty guards, but a high-ranking, perfumed figure in crimson robes. He carries a tablet, eyes downcast. He murmurs that your penance is nearly complete. He looks at your bowl. You've eaten well, he says. There is a hint of amusement in his tone. Or maybe regret. He taps the tablet once, nods to the guards, and leaves. That night, they give you a special ash bowl. It smells sweet, almost like incense. You taste it and gag. There's honey in it. Yes, but also a gritty bitterness that floods your nose and stings your eyes. You eat it anyway. The guards watch closely. One of them whispers, "That's the one that finishes you." Your stomach burns like oil, under siege. You curl into a ball and tremble for hours. Dreams come in waves. You see temples collapsing, kings laughing, a sandstorm made of open mouths. You cry out, and your voice echoes like a cracked bell. When you finally awaken, if this is awakening, you're alone. The guards are gone. The room is quiet. The door stands open. You stagger to your feet, bones creaking like rotted wood. Every joint protests. Your skin is ash-colored now. You walk out slowly, one step at a time. No one stops you. No one looks at you. You pass through hallways filled with torches and fine mosaic tiles, trailing a line of gray footprints behind you. Slaves avert their eyes. Nobles wrinkle their noses. You hear someone whisper ghost. You wander to the riverbank, drop to your knees, and try to wash your face. The water recoils. The mud clings to you. You scrub and scrub, but the gray won't leave. It's part of you now, like the memories of each foul meal. The next day, they parade you through the market as a warning. The ash eater. They call you. Children laugh. Dogs bark. You try to hold your head high, but the sun feels too bright, like it's trying to peel you from the inside. Somewhere in the crowd, someone throws a fig. You catch it, barely, and tuck it into your robe. Later, you bury it like a relic. One of the oldest scrolls you once copied spoke of purification through suffering. A soul burned clean. You never understood it until now. You're not pure. You're not clean, but you've been rewritten. You no longer belong to yourself. You drift across the city for weeks, silent and dust-covered, watched but never touched. One morning, you find a shrine unattended. You slip inside. The ashes in the censer smell familiar. You breathe them in deeply and smile. The scent hits you first. Jasmine and rosemary, so thick it nearly masks the iron tang in the air. You blink into sunlight as you're escorted into the garden lush, expansive, ringed with date palms and purple-petaled vines. Birds sing overhead. A fountain trickles beside a sculpted lion whose mouth constantly drools water onto mossy marble. But it's the red roses that dominate. They rise in thick hedges, velvety and vast, their blooms heavy as if soaked in wine. The guards refer to it as the Royal Executioner's Garden. You're starting to understand why. You're not here to admire the landscaping. The garden is immaculate. 100 gardeners tend to it daily. Yet none of them are present now. Just you, the guards, and a man in a robe, far too clean for this level of menace. He's old, but not frail muscles built under decades of selective cruelty. He carries shears, gold-trimmed, engraved with tiny winged lions. You watch him trim a rose with gentle precision, as if beheading something sacred. Then, he gestures for you to kneel. You hesitate. He smiles. 2 guards place firm hands on your shoulders, and down you go, knees pressing into the dew-slick grass, which smells almost disappointingly nice. You brace for pain. Instead, the executioner speaks, slow and calm. In the old tongue, he's telling a story. You recognize it, a parable from your childhood. Something about a prince who grew roses from the blood of traitors. You remember laughing at it once. Now, you wonder if it was based on this very garden. He plucks a rose, not a red one, but a pale pink, veined with gold. He tucks it behind your ear, then pats your cheek. You have no idea what any of this means. One of the guards clears his throat and gestures toward a stone path. Time to walk. You rise, slowly, unsure if you're being led to torture or tea. The garden winds on. As you walk, you notice curious things. Small depressions in the soil, shaped like ribs. Bits of rope sticking out from the base of certain trees. The marble bench you pass is discolored rusty streaks in the white stone. Birds avoid the far end of the garden. That's where the real roses grow. The black ones, nearly the size of your head. You don't want to ask what feeds them. According to palace rumor, this garden was planted atop a burial pit after the failed revolt of the river provinces. The dead were composted, some literally, and the soil was blessed by both a Zoroastrian priest and a Babylonian exorcist. It's said the roses bloom only when a body is buried beneath each hedge. Historians still argue whether that's metaphor or just royal branding. You arrive at a round clearing, perfectly symmetrical. In its center is a stone platform, stained, darker than the rest. A single wooden post rises from its middle, polished from use. A stool sits beside it. The executioner waves at it like he's inviting you to afternoon tea. You sit, confused. He pulls a scroll from his sleeve and reads off your crimes. They sound fancier than what you remember doing. Insolence toward a satrap becomes verbal poison in the ears of sovereignty. A missed tax deadline becomes intentional destabilization of imperial economic flow. You would protest. But you've learned by now, Persian paperwork is just a more formal kind of blade. Then he does something odd. He asks if you would like to garden. You blink. One of the guards chuckles under his breath. The executioner repeats himself. Would you like to make something grow? You nod. What else can you do? He hands you a seed. It's black and hard, shaped like a tear. You're led to a fresh patch of soil, recently turned. The earth is warm. You kneel. You plant the seed. You cover it with dirt. The executioner nods solemnly. Then he strikes, not with his shears, but with a leather whip, soaked in rose oil. The scent hits your lungs like perfume laced with vinegar. Each lash wraps around you with strange elegance. It's not the worst pain you've felt, but it lingers. A sting that refuses to fade. A perfume of punishment. You're lashed 10 times. No blood, just welts that smell disturbingly floral. The guards help you stand. The executioner hands you a cup of rosewater, chilled, surprisingly delicious. You drink it in 2 gulps, and just like that, it's done. You're escorted out of the garden and locked in a small chamber nearby. No food, just silence, rose-scented clothes, and a window that overlooks the flower beds. Over the next few days, You see other prisoners walk the same path. Most plant seeds. Some cry. A few resist and are dragged away not to the garden, but to the fire pits. On the third morning, your patch of soil sprouts. A single stem, pale green, rising defiantly. A servant appelle. She bows and says, "You will not die this week." Apparently, the plants choose. If your flower fails to bloom, they say, you're taken at sunset to nourish the others. If it thrives, you're spared. For now, a game of horticultural roulette. The guards don't explain the rules. The executioner nods at you when your flower blooms. A subtle approval, like a teacher satisfied with a mediocre student. You're released back into the city with a brand on your shoulder in the shape of a rose thorn. It's meant to remind others that you've been corrected. You return to the outer districts, where no one makes eye contact. Your family pretends not to recognize you. Even your dog barks once, then runs. Over time, you notice something. You can still smell the roses, even in crowded markets, even beside spice carts and fried onion stalls. The rose scent follows you. Your skin exudes it. Some people recoil. A few are drawn to it: widows, fortune tellers, criminals with twitchy hands. You become something between a ghost and a garden ornament. Eventually, you take work as a gardener. Where else would you fit? You grow herbs, bitter greens, nothing as showy as roses. But you learn to coax bloom from barren soil. You mutter to your plants in the same tone the executioner used. They seem to listen. You never return to the palace, though sometimes you see its towers from afar, glinting in the sun like gold-tipped spears. On hot nights, the wind carries rose scent from the royal garden. You close your eyes and remember the whip, the seed, the look on the executioner's face, not cruel, just precise, like a man pruning a tree to ensure it grows in the right direction. You wonder how many others now walk the city with thorn-shaped scars. You wonder if they still water their flowers in secret, or if they too have found peace in pruning. You don't forgive the garden, but you never forget it. You're on your knees again, this time on sun-baked earth just outside the city walls, surrounded by banners, bells, and the smell of hot dust and manure. A crowd is forming, murmuring in a dozen dialects: traders, pilgrims, nobles who've arrived early for the New Year parade. They're not here for the procession. They're here for you. Behind you snort a pair of Persian war horses, broad-shouldered and draped in embroidered silks. Their eyes are painted red ceremonial rage, and their hooves are wrapped in bronze cuffs that gleam in the afternoon light. One of them paws the ground, eager or anxious or both. The grooms feed them honey-soaked barley and whisper invocations to Mithra. A soldier oils their hooves with something thick and foul-smelling. You're pretty sure it's goat fat mixed with resin. Slippery, but not too slippery. Just enough traction to crunch effectively. Your wrists are tied behind your back with silk rope. Not because it's luxurious, but because it's strong and looks good in the artwork. You're dressed in a pale robe that once belonged to a priest. That was part of the insult. You mocked a provincial ritual. Something about lunar alignments and royal destiny. You made a joke. Everyone laughed, including the governor. But the wrong ears heard it. Turns out, it was the king's dream, the very one you mocked. Now here you are, about to be trampled for doubting divinity, according to royal decree. Defying a prophetic dream is akin to stabbing the empire's future with a rusted dagger. It damages morale. And you, friend, are morale-damaging material. So, now, you're the main attraction at what might as well be the Empire's deadliest talent show. Welcome, the Master of Ceremonies, a glimmering peacock of a man with more rings than fingers, steps forward and announces your crime. He makes it sound far more poetic than it was. Something about defiling the celestial visions of his radiance. A few people gasp dramatically. You roll your eyes. Mistake. He sees. Now, he's adding mockery during sentencing to the list. The horses are brought forward. They've been trained. You're told to strike precisely, not a chaotic stampede, but a divine choreography. One will crush the legs. The other aims for the chest. The last horse, the smaller one, is reserved for your head if you're still moving. Her name is Shabnam, which means dew. Ironic, since she's about to dew your skull into the afterlife. Historians still argue whether these punishments were public, as deterrents or rituals, meant to show divine correction. Either way, the symbolism is brutal. Dreams are fragile, so are bones. A priest steps out to bless the hooves. Yes, the hooves. Each one is touched with a dab of wine and ash, then anointed with whispers from an ancient book no one can quite read anymore. The horses are calm during the ceremony. You wonder if they know what they're about to do. You wonder if they care. Then something odd happens. The governor arrives, the same one who laughed at your joke. He looks embarrassed. He pulls the master of ceremonies aside. They whisper. There's a short debate. Fingers point. A scroll is produced. Finally, the governor sighs, throws his hands up, and walks away. The master of ceremonies steps forward, clears his throat, and declares, by mercy of the governor, the sentence shall be adjusted. You blink. They cut your ropes. Adjusted. It turns out, does not mean canceled. Instead, you're placed into a harness and hung upside down beneath the horses, strapped to a wooden frame that keeps you suspended just inches from their hooves. Now, rather than stomping you directly, they're to be paraded in a slow circle around the city, dragging you beneath them like a very unfortunate wind chime. The crowd cheers. Someone throws a date at you. It hits your forehead and sticks. You don't bother removing it. The parade begins. You sway gently under the horses, each jolt of their gait jerking your spine. Dust fills your nose. Stones jab your ribs. Occasionally, one hoof brushes too close and grazes your shoulder. A near miss. You flinch each time, which only makes the crowd laugh harder. You're a sideshow now, an upside-down jester of disbelief. The horses are remarkably well trained. They never stomp, never falter. Just keep walking, imperial, majestic, indifferent to your suffering. Shabnam sneezes once. You pray it's not an omen. You pass a line of children who've painted your face on clay plates, each with exaggerated eyebrows and bulging eyes. One of them asks her mother if you're a real ghost. You feel like one. A few hours in, the sun starts to bake your skin. Your head pounds with pressure. The blood pools in your face. Your ears ring like temple bells. You begin hallucinating visions of your mother, of dreams you never had, of horses whispering state secrets in ancient Persian. Eventually, the parade ends. You're unhooked and dropped onto the dirt like a sack of unwanted laundry. Someone pour water over you. Not much, just enough to make the dust cling to your skin like a second layer of shame. They don't kill you. That's the worst part. You're left to recover in a stable, curled up beside a trough, smelling like hoof polish and barley farts. The horses are led in one by one. Shabnam pauses beside you. She looks at you for a long time. Then, with the grace of a holy queen, she lifts her tail and poops beside your head. You consider it divine commentary. You recover eventually. Though the world never quite feels upright again, you have a permanent crick in your neck. Your sense of balance is forever ruined. Every time you hear hoofbeats, you flinch, but something else changes too. People recognize you. You're the dream doubter. They whisper, the hoof ghost. Children mimic the sound of galloping when you walk by. Merchants offer you discounts, unsure whether you're cursed or blessed. You become a legend, and not the good kind. One day, you find yourself in a dusty tavern, drunk on something you can't name, and someone asks if the horses really spared you. You laugh and say, "They never needed to stop me. They just showed me where I stood." It sounds wise, philosophical. Even, you say it again, louder. A scribe in the corner writes it down. A week later, your quote appears on a mosaic tile outside a palace bathhouse. You're now a footnote in royal philosophy. Congratulations. You're pretty sure this is a camel. It smells like a camel. It groans like a camel. It even sighs dramatically when the executioners approach as if it, too. I can't believe the Empire is making it participate in this nonsense. The beast is already dead, sprawled on its side beneath a canvas canopy. Legs stiff, mouth half open, as if still chewing the last of its life. Its belly has been slit, cleanly and deeply, and the insides have been scooped out with alarming precision. A hollow, steaming cavity gapes open beneath your feet. The guards nudge you forward. Welcome to the punishment known in whispers as the camel womb. According to the scrolls, this was used for blasphemers, spies, and anyone who mocked the royal menagerie. You did all three. You suggested the king's prized war camel looked a bit like a wet rug. Your voice carried. There were dignitaries present. One of them laughed. That sealed it. Now you're being sewn into the carcass of a camel with a needle the size of your forearm and thread made of gut. You lie back as they lift your legs and slide you gently, almost respectfully, into the still warm cavity. The camel's ribs poke at your sides. It smells like rotten milk, blood, and something vaguely medicinal. Someone sprinkled herbs inside. Maybe for you. Maybe for the flies. Historians still argue whether this punishment was intended as execution or transformation. One theory holds that it was symbolic rebirth, a cruel parody of atonement through pain. Another suggests it was simply a mobile prison, no walls, no locks, just a steaming beast sewn shut around your regrets. As the flap of flesh closes over your head, the light dims to a soft, putrid glow. A voice unseen, perhaps belonging to the executioner, murmurs something about becoming one with what you insulted. You try to reply, but your mouth is stuffed with linen soaked in vinegar. Not to silence you, to keep you from choking on the stink, they sew the last stitch. You are inside. Your world becomes a wet, fleshy tomb. Every breath is a prayer for clean air. The camel's interior pulses with residual heat. You shift slightly. Your foot bumps something squishy. You hope it's not what you think it is. Somewhere above, the outer hide of the beast begins to stiffen. The desert air is drying it. You are being preserved and baked at the same time. Time loses shape. At first, there is noise, cheering, muttering, a flute, maybe a child laughing. Then silence. The camel is loaded onto a cart. You can feel the wheels creak beneath you. You're being transported. Destination unknown. You wonder if it matters. You try not to panic. You fail. Your chest tightens. You struggle to breathe. The linen muffles your screams. In the darkness, something moves. A beetle. Maybe. Or several. You can't see. But you can feel. Tiny feet. Brushing your ankles. Your neck. Your cheeks. Your only defense is to hold perfectly still. You become a statue in the temple of decay. Eventually, the cart stops. You are unloaded. Dumped. Perhaps. The camel slumps onto another surface stone. Maybe. You hear water. And voices. They sound distant. Reverent. You're somewhere important. Temple gatehouse kitchen. A flap is cut open. Light floods in. You squint. Pupils burning. A priest leans in, holding a scroll. He reads a list of offenses in a bored voice, then sprinkles wine over the camel's head. A ritual of purification, or condemnation. You're not sure anymore. They don't pull you out. Instead, they build a low wall of stones around the camel. They pour oil over it, just a drizzle, enough to keep the flies respectful. A servant places a jug of water beside it. For who? Exactly. You try to drink by shifting your head toward a crack in the flesh. You manage a sip. It tastes like leather and salt. A day pass. Then two. Age dumb. Someone arrives and asks if you're ready to speak the truth. You are. You so are. But no one removes the linen gag. It's symbolic. They say, the confession must come from the soul, not the mouth. You don't know what that means, but it sounds like something invented by a particularly smug philosopher. You hallucinate again. You dream of sandstorms and banquet halls, of the camel standing proudly on the battlefield, draped in royal armor, sneering at your insult. You apologize to it in your dreams. It demands a poem. You write one in your head using only vowels and regret. On the third night, rain falls. Somehow it makes it worse. The moisture seeps through the camel's thick hide, turning the interior into a slippery swamp of rot and humidity. You shiver. You swear the hide is growing mold. Or maybe you are. Then, just before dawn, salvation, or something like it, a boy sneaks up to the camel with a small knife. He whispers, "Are you still alive?" You grunt. It's all you can manage. He slices open a seam, and you slither out like a reborn ghoul. Dripping, gasping, looking like death's janitor. He helps you to your feet, laughing under his breath. You smell like prophecy. He jokes. You run. Or try. Your legs don't remember how. You stumble into the reeds. Half naked. Wrapped in strands of camel guts and guilt. You wash in the river until your skin feels like it might peel off. Then you collapse on the bank and sleep like someone who's forgotten what comfort means. When you wake, the boy is gone. But so is the camel. Some say it was dragged back to the palace, stuffed with another unfortunate soul. Others say it was burned, and its ashes spread as warning. You never find out. You wander the countryside, keeping to yourself. hiding when patrols come. Farmers feed you out of pity. Children call you the one who rode inside. Eventually, you find peace in a quiet place. You learn to dry herbs, brew medicine, speak gently to animals. Camels still make you flinch, but you grow to appreciate their stubborn silence. One day, you hear of a new punishment being handed down in the capital. Something to do with the jar of serpents. You shake your head and whisper, "At least it's not a camel." Then you laugh for the first time in weeks. You awaken to movement. Not jostling cartwheels or shuffling guards, but a slow, steady drift. As if your bed has suddenly learned to float. There's water lapping against wood. The air is warm and thick with smoke. Your back aches from the awkward arch of your spine against whatever you're tied to. It takes a few moments for your eyes to adjust to the flickering orange glow above your head. Then you realize you're floating down the Tigris River, strapped to a barge that is gently, deliberately catching fire. Not all at once. That would be too efficient. This barge is wide, flat, built of dry tamarisk wood and coated in a glistening black resin that smells suspiciously like lamp oil. You're lashed to it with surprisingly soft rope because chafing would apparently be cruel. Around you, decorative torches illuminate the deck, some already tipping, their flames licking sideways in the river breeze. You are the centerpiece. Congratulations. You're on fire. But make it aesthetic. This is called the Flaming River Barge. You heard of it once. Muttered in the back of a tavern. A royal punishment reserved for false prophets and failed rebel leaders. And for you? The court magician, who told Queen Atassa her husband's stomach bug was a sign from the gods. Unfortunately, he died, which means either your prophecy was right, which they don't want, or it was dangerously wrong, which they really don't want. Historians still argue whether the barge punishment was purely ceremonial, or if it doubled as a warning to river traders. Either way, you're about to become a very warm example. This isn't execution. It's performance art, on shore. Nobles in silk robes lounge on stone steps with fans and wine cups, watching the firelight shimmer off the water. A small chorus hums from the banks. Children seat cross-legged, waiting for the moment when your barge turns from orange to black. There's even a man sketching it. He'll probably get it printed on clay tiles for the palace atrium. You hope he at least gets your nose right. The fire starts at the corners. Strategically, like a painter working the edges of a canvas, the flames crawl toward you, slow and deliberate. Someone planned this. You bet there was a meeting. With diagrams, your platform is slightly raised, giving you a perfect view of your own doom. To your left is a jug of water empty. Of course, to your right is a bowl of pomegranates, full, mocking. You try to reach them. Your fingers graze the edge. You knock one into the river, and it floats away like a smug little ruby. The wind picks up. Your robes flutter, smoke drifting upward in lazy coils. Somewhere behind you, musicians start playing a slow, rhythmic drum beat. Every few beats, a cymbal rings along, shivering, cheeing, that seems to echo your heartbeat. A priest chants something about fire being the purifier of liars. You'd protest, but your mouth is gagged with silk. You assume it was one of your own scarves. You had good taste. Suddenly, a twist of fate. The barge drifts toward a snag in the river, a branch, or maybe a submerged rock. You jolt. The crowd gasps. One of the torches tips prematurely and falls into the water with a hiss. The flames falter. A murmur ripples along the shoreline. This wasn't in the choreography. The guards scramble. One of them wades into the river to push the barge back into the current. He slips. The crowd laughs. You try to wiggle free while no one's looking. The rope groans, but doesn't break. Great. Foiled by quality knotwork, you look up and lock eyes with someone on the shore. A woman. No fan. No whine. No smile. Just watching. She lifts a hand. 2 fingers raised. Not a greeting. A sign. You recognize it's something from the old cults. Before the fire worship became fashionable, she's mouthing words you can't hear. Maybe a prayer. Maybe a curse. It's oddly comforting either way. The barge steadies. The fire recovers. You feel heat licking your toes. The crowd returns to sipping and watching. One man shouts, "Confess as if you could." You roll your eyes. He laughs, and then, a miracle. Rain, a single fat drop at first, splashing on your cheek like a bird's insult. Then another, and another. Soon, the fire sizzles with irritation. The smoke thickens. The nobles mutter and retreat beneath awnings. The musicians stop playing. You tilt your head back and let the rain hit your tongue. It tastes of dust and vengeance. A soldier runs along the riverbank, shouting for orders. The priest waves frantically. They hadn't planned for weather. No one ever does. One of the guards on the opposite shore pulls a rope tied to your barge. You're being towed. You're not sure if that means rescue or retry. Either way, the flames die out, choking on the rain. You are soaked, sore, and profoundly smoky, but not dead. Back on shore, you're yanked off the barge and dragged to a tent. Inside, a satrap with a bored expression fans himself with a scroll. "It seems," he says, "that Ahura Mazda has opinions about your sentence." He glances at the rain. "We are reconsidering." You're thrown into a cell to await celestial consensus. Days pass. The guards stop calling you prophet and start calling you the one who almost flamed. You become a punchline, a Shog legend. Eventually, the queen herself sends word. Not an apology, just a sealed letter with a single phrase, "Next time. Stick to weather forecasts." They release you. You wander the southern provinces, where people haven't heard of the barge. You learn to fish. You build a small boat that never catches fire. You talk to rivers like old friends. You never wear silk again. Sometimes, you light a small candle and float it downstream at night. You watch it drift until it disappears. Not as punishment, just as ritual, quiet, gentle, forgiving. And when it rains, you smile. You sit trembling in the hall of attire. A room filled with mirrors, combs, and silent men brushing oil into their beards. You don't have a beard. You barely have dignity. What you do have is a record 3 days ago. You made the critical mistake of joking about a noble's facial hair in front of a banquet hall full of tax collectors and wine-sodden generals. You compared it, if memory serves, to a damp broom dipped in plum sauce. Someone laughed. You felt clever. Then everything went silent, and the noble in question stroked his magnificent, glistening beard with the delicate horror of a man petting a beloved animal who's just been mocked in public. Now you're here, and the sentence has been announced. Whipping by beard. No, not with a beard. By the beard. Apparently, insulting facial hair in the Persian Empire is treason adjacent, especially when that facial hair belongs to a man descended from a line of governors known for crushing rebellions and perfect grooming. Beard defamation. They call it. There are laws and rituals and, to your horror, a designated punishment beard. Historians still argue whether this was a one-time ceremonial event or part of a broader code of facial justice. Either way, it's happening now, and you're the star. The beard arrives in a silk-lined box carried by 2 attendants. It is no longer attached to a face. This is a preserved family heirloom, centuries old, soaked in fragrant oils, woven into a sort of whip, dark, wiry, and terrifying. A priest kisses the end and mutters a blessing about legacy and follicles. You try to speak. A hand gestures you to silence. The noble himself enters the hall. He walks like he owns the floor, and probably does. His beard, not the punishment beard. His current one flows down his chest like a small obsidian waterfall. It glistens unnaturally, as if individually oiled and brushed by tiny servants. He does not look at you. He speaks only to the executioner. You may begin, he says. You're bent over a padded stool. Your back is bare. The beard whip makes a soft brushing sound as it arcs through the air, then lands with a thwop that's more insult than injury. The first few strikes sting sharp, fibrous, more like being flogged with a broom dipped in mint oil. Oh, the irony. But the pain escalates. Each lash leaves a welt. Your skin burns. You grit your teeth and try not to whimper. The noble observes passively, sipping something clear from a glass, as the executioner works with rhythmic precision. It's less about punishment now, and more about showmanship. Every 5th strike is punctuated by a ceremonial phrase, by the strength of his ancestors, by the dignity of the court, by the sacred roots of manhood. You are being flogged by both beard and legacy. After 20 lashes, they stop. The noble approaches. He crouches beside you. You smell sandalwood and arrogance. You have learned your lesson, he says, brushing your hair back with 2 fingers. Yes. You nod. You nod so fast your head might fall off. He smiles. Good. Then, just when you think it's over, he dips the beard whip in warm wax and smacks your bare back once more, leaving an imprint of the braid across your spine. A mark. He explains, so you don't forget the texture of honor. They escort you out of the hall, like you're nothing more than a cleaned plate. Your legs shake. You're handed a robe, stiff with starch. A small bottle of beard oil is pressed into your hand. A mercy gift. You spend 3 days lying face down on a cot in a windowless room that smells of burnt cloves. Your back aches. Your pride is in shreds. But the oil is actually quite nice. You rub a little on your eyebrows out of spite. Eventually, word spreads. People whisper, "That's the one who mocked the beard." He still flinches when he sees brushes. He sleeps with the windows closed, so no wind ruffles his hair. You're marked. Not just physically, socially. The noble's allies avoid you. The satrap's cooks refuse to serve you. But others, the servants, the actors, the poets, they find you fascinating. You become the underground hero of beard-based rebellion. You write anonymous verses. You sneak them into barber shops and bathhouses. One day, a merchant gives you a carved figurine. It's of a man holding a razor. For courage, he says. You weep a little, privately, but vengeance. No. You've learned. Not all insults need to be voiced. Some just need to be styled. You take up work in a small perfumery, distilling oils for beard balms and mustache wax. You name them, things like defiance and mild apology. They sell well. Nobles come to you secretly, asking for blends that smell like rain or forgiveness. One asks for something that smells like fear. You deliver. The noble who punished you, he hears of your business, sends a letter. Just 2 words, well played. You smile, and bottle that too. It starts with honey, not a dollop, not a drizzle, but buckets of it, thick, golden, and so sticky it clings to your eyelashes when they pour it over your face. Your arms are pinned to your sides with leather straps. Your legs are splayed and bound at the ankles. You lie flat on your back in a long, narrow canoe hollowed out from cedar and polished until it gleams. Another identical canoe rests beside it, waiting to become your lid. Welcome to scaphism, the punishment the Greeks would later call the boats, but you just call it the worst picnic ever. This isn't just a Persian punishment, it's the Persian punishment, whispered about across campfires and marketplaces like a horror story too grotesque to be true. Historians still argue whether it was used frequently or only for particularly legendary traitors. Some think it was just anti-Persian propaganda. Others point to references in royal scrolls, where the crime of sowing confusion in the minds of soldiers was answered with exactly this: your crime. Distributing pamphlets, not paper, but carved wax tablets, suggesting that the emperor's divine right might be slightly exaggerated. And now, here you are, basted like a pastry and left to the mercy of sun, time, and anything that crawls. They start with the face, honey smeared in your nostrils, in your ears, across your chest and down to your groin. Then milk lukewarm and sour is poured into your mouth. You try to spit it out. They hold your nose until you swallow. Then they pour more. You burp, gag, whimper. They're not trying to hydrate you. They're trying to disrupt your guts. Fermentation. From the inside out. Once you're fully slathered, they place the second canoe over you, trapping your limbs inside the wooden coffin. Only your head, hands, and feet poke out. Your face feels like it's been dipped in a jar of jam and left at a summer picnic. Then they float you into the marsh. The reeds part as your canoe is nudged out into the water. The bank recedes. Tree loom. Insects buzz louder. You feel the first sting before you see the culprit, a wasp. Curious and aggressive, it lands on your cheek, tastes the honey, and decides to stay. Then another, and another. Soon you're the guest of honor at the most uncomfortable buffet in history. Time slips. It could be hours or days. You're not sure. The sun rises and sets. You burn. You freeze. Your skin boils with bites. You drift through clouds of gnats, so dense they hum. The milk inside you curdles. Your belly swells. You try to scream, but your lips are glued shut with honey and sun-cracked crust. Occasionally, a guard pulls out in a skiff to check on you. He brings more milk, more honey. He hums a lullaby as he pours it down your throat. You hate him with a clarity you've never felt before. He smiles like a man feeding ducks. The marsh becomes your world. Frogs croak beneath you. Fish nibble the bottom of the canoe. You pray for rain. It doesn't come. Your body betrays you. The milk has done its work. You soil yourself. The smell mixes with the sweet and sour. Insects rejoice. Maggots arrive. You feel them, but can't move. The canoe holds you in place like a carved accusation. Once, a heron lands nearby and studies you. For a moment, you think it will peck out your eyes, but it just stares, then flies away with a squawk that sounds disturbingly like laughter. In the night, you hallucinate. You see the emperor, seated on a floating throne, surrounded by whispering reeds. He offers you a goblet. Drink, he says, and wake up free. You drink. You wake up. You're still in the boat. One evening, thunder rolls in. Clouds gather. The marsh trembles with wind. And yet no rain. Just noise and light. Nature taunts you with the promise of mercy. Lightning splits a tree. You hope it hits you next. It doesn't. On what might be the 6th day, or the 60th, you stop feeling the bites. Your skin is raw. Puffy. One giant wound. You barely blink. Flies swarm so thickly, your vision turns black. You think you see your own reflection in the water bloated, shining, crowned with bees. And then, the boat moves. Not drifting pulled. Hands grip the edge. Ahwif. Guards. They're towing you back. You hear muttering. One of them says, "Still alive." Another says, "No eyes left, but breathing." You don't care. You're hoisted from the water like driftwood. The stench nearly knocks one of them overboard. Back on land. The canoe is pried open. Your arms flop out like wet rope. Someone takes your pulse. There's a moment of silence. "Leave him," says a voice. "Let the gods decide." But someone doesn't. A woman, an herbalist, or a priestess. Maybe both orders them away. You're carted off. Wrapped in linen, soaked in vinegar and myrrh. Days pass. You blink once. She gasps. You blink again. Recovery is slow. Painful. Intimate. You're fed liquids through a reed. Bathed in cool water under the moonlight. Slathered in pastes that smell of mint and ashes. Eventually, you speak. A single word. Why? She answers. Because they'll forget what they did to you. But I won't. You don't ask her name. You couldn't pronounce it even if you tried. You heal. Scarred. Sightless in one eye. Covered in strange, swirling marks left by maggot trails. You wear long robes and speak softly. Children think you're a seer. Maybe you are. Years later, a new emperor ascends. He abolishes scapism, calls it a stain on Persian honor. They cheer him as merciful. You sit in the back of the crowd, tasting phantom honey, and whisper, "Too late." The dream wasn't even your dream. You just overheard it half drunk, leaning against a pillar in a candlelit hall, where the court astrologers had gathered to interpret His Majesty's latest celestial vision. Apparently, the king dreamed of a glowing elephant whispering secrets into his ear. Then, stomping a golden crab, he woke up weeping and demanded meaning. You snorted. Quietly. You thought, apparently not quietly enough. Now, you're standing in a dusty courtyard, ringed with torches, tethered to a post, while the royal elephant handler explains to a circle of spectators that elephant punishment is rare, symbolic, and exquisitely precise. You're nodding, You hope that helps. It doesn't. The elephant itself, named Sahar, stands nearby, swaying gently, like a tree that's also a god. She's enormous, adorned in crimson silk and golden bells. Her tusks are painted. Her toenails are clean. She looks glorious and extremely capable of stomping you into decorative tiles. But Sahar isn't angry. She's bored, which is worse. She's been trained. The handler says to follow specific movements. A certain whistle means crush the legs. A different tone means flatten the chest. A fluttering flag tells her to pretend to stomp. The handler demonstrates. Sahar lifts one enormous foot over a melon, pauses for dramatic effect, then brings it down slowly. The melon doesn't just burst, it surrenders. Seeds scatter across the sand. You are the next melon. Historians still argue whether Persian elephant punishments were theatrical flourishes or deadly precision instruments of state terror. Some records claim elephants were used to dismember traitors. Others suggest it was pure performance meant to humiliate without necessarily kill. You are sincerely hoping it's the latter. You're untied from the post and gently guided to lie on a mat of lotus leaves. A flute plays a gentle tune. Sahar approaches, swaying like royalty, flanked by handlers, murmuring prayers. You're breathing like a dying fish. Arms trembling. Legs refusing to believe this is happening. But it is. Sahar stops. Her massive shadow swallows you whole. Then, with the most delicate motion you've ever witnessed, she raises her foot and places it squarely on your left thigh. You do not move. You do not blink. You do not breathe. The pressure is unbelievable. Not crushing yet, but enough to remind you that you are mortal. Soft, and profoundly regretful of your wit. Upriest chance. The crowd murmurs. Someone passes around dates. Sahar shifts slightly. More weight. Your thigh feels like it's filling with fire and regret. The flute changes pitch. She holds still. You start to sob. Very quietly, like a nobleman allergic to discomfort. The handler raises his hand. The flute stops. So does the pressure. Sahar lifts her foot. Your leg is intact. Bruised. Yes. Possibly cracked. But still attached. Then she steps forward and places her right foot gently on your chest. This time, the weight is even more terrifying. You feel your ribs bend like branches. She isn't trying to kill you. She's trying to make you feel like you're about to die. It works. You look into her eyes. They're calm, almost maternal. You want to scream? Why me, but your lungs are half compressed. All that comes out is a whimper. And then she backs off. The crowd cheers. You are rolled onto your side by a servant who whispers, "You lived. Don't ever joke again." Which is fair. You're carried to a shaded tent where a physician examines your limbs with a whistle of admiration. Barely any breakage. He says, "She's an artist." He slathers you in mint oil and wraps your leg with linen soaked in vinegar. A sweet old woman offers you chilled rose water. You drink it. It tastes like survival. The next day, you're summoned to court. Not for further punishment, for presentation. The king wants to see you. You hobble into the hall. Bruised and humbled. Bowing low. He eyes you curiously from his elevated seat. Dressed in sapphire robes that shimmer like fish scales. They say, "Sahar spared you." He murmurs. You nod. She stepped on you. And you lived. You nod again. Then you must be blessed. Wait. What? The court erupts in applause. You're handed a sash royal blue, embroidered with golden elephants, and named the Humble Listener. A ceremonial title. Utterly meaningless. Utterly terrifying. You're now a living symbol of obedience. Whenever the king issues a new proclamation, you're paraded through the streets, limping and nodding. A reminder to the people that even skepticism can be corrected gracefully. Children follow you chanting rhymes. Elephant foot. Stomp the doubt. Look who lived to talk about. You consider changing your name or your face. Instead, you start feeding Sahar apples, sweets. She remembers you. She rumbles softly when you arrive. You swear she winks. Eventually, they retire her. She's old, wise, and too gentle now for stomping. She lives in a royal grove beside the river. You visit often. She lets you nap beside her, your head against her massive flank. You whisper, "Thank you." She flicks her ear. You take that as forgiveness. Or maybe she's just shooing away flies. The moment the heavy wooden door slams shut, you know something's wrong. The air in the chamber is warm and sharp, like someone boiled vinegar and sulfur in an amphora and cracked it open just before you walked in. You stumble forward, eyes watering, nostrils flaring, and realize you've been led into what palace guards whisperingly refer to as the fire sneeze dungeon, a place where confession isn't coaxed, it's sneezed, coughed, and screamed out of you in fits. It's smaller than you expected. No chains, no visible weapons, just stone walls, a grated ceiling far above, and in each corner, a large clay pot with faint wisps of smoke rising from the rim. 4 guards shut the outer door behind you, lock it, and vanish without a word. You're alone. Except you're not. A flickering torch illuminates a figure in the corner, an old woman, slouched on a stool, grinding something in a mortar with rhythmic, malicious calm. She doesn't look up, just mutters. You smell like someone who thought they'd get away with it. You try to respond, but you already feel your throat tighten. The first sneeze comes out violently, an explosion of air that echoes against the stone like a trumpet of doom. She grins without teeth. What crime brought you here? Nothing thrilling. You declined to sponsor a noble's poetry collection. He said your refusal undermined the cultural prestige of the empire. You said it undermined your budget. Now you're here, about to confess everything you've ever done wrong, including childhood lies and once stealing a fig. The smoke is the first layer. It smells like burning garlic and rotten fruit. Your eyes sting. You blink uncontrollably. The second layer comes from the floor, a scattered powder you recognize, pulverized pepper pods mixed with fine lime dust. Every step kicks it up. You cough. You sneeze. You trip. From above, a stone plate slides open. A handful of dried herbs rain down crushed hellebore. Maybe. The old woman wafts the air toward you with a slow flap of her hand. Admit it, she rasps. Say you meant to insult the noble's art. You shake your head. Another sneeze. She walks over, holding a bowl. Inside thick syrup studded with seeds. You're told to drink. You resist. She shrugs and dumps it onto the ground. Moments later, your bare feet start itching. The seeds. Some sort of irritant. Clever. Historians still argue whether this chamber was used regularly or only in specific decades. Some claim it was a foreign import, possibly inspired by Babylonian punishment rituals involving pungent roots and confession by induced hallucination. Others think it was invented by a bored torturer with a love of kitchen herbs. Whatever its origin, it works. Within minutes, your eyes are swollen, your lips tingling, your body twitching with sneezes that feel like they're trying to launch your brain through your nose. Then she brings out the bell. Not to ring, to wear. She straps it around your neck. Every time you sneeze, it chimes. Every time it chimes, another dose of powder is puffed into the room through the wall vents. A cycle of agony, engineered for dramatic pacing. You try to recite your innocence. All that comes out is gibberish and mucus. She writes something on a wax tablet, nods, and says, "That sounds like guilt to me." You're not the first to visit this place. In the corner, you spot etched lines in the stone marks made by fingernails or maybe teeth. A faint smear of green paste on the wall, possibly from a past occupant's last attempt at escape or at art. At one point, the old woman brings in a bowl of water. You dive at it like a man possessed. It's salt water. You gag. She cackles. For cleansing the truth. She explains. When you finally collapse, exhausted and wheezing, she kneels beside you. "Let's try another method," she whispers. She dips a brush into a bowl of yellow paste and paints it across your forehead, murmuring prayers to some forgotten wind god. The paste heats your skin. Your vision warps. You see colors that don't exist and remember sins you never committed. Un moment later, a door opens. A different one. Clean air floods in. 2 scribes enter, flanked by guards. "Read this," one says, handing you a scroll. It's a confession. Not yours. Not really, but close enough. You nod. You sign it. You would sign anything. Your hands shake, and the ink smudges into what could pass for your name. They drag you out and leave you blinking in the sunlight, wrapped in damp linens and shame. Your nose bleeds. Your lips burn. You smell like a spice rack that lost a war. Back in the city, people whisper, "That's the one who sneezed his way into exile." They say he confessed to things that hadn't even happened yet. His sneeze could kill a pigeon. You recover. Mostly. But you never visit a kitchen again. Spices make you flinch. Smoke makes you cry. And once, someone rings a bell in the marketplace, and you drop like a stone. Hands over your face. Convinced the pepper fog is coming. Later, you hear the dungeon's been renamed the Hall of Aromatic Contrition. They're turning it into a museum. You laugh, then sneeze, then cry. You stand naked, but for a grimy loincloth, shivering slightly in the courtyard as a dozen prisoners shuffle toward you, each holding what looks like a bird bone. No one explains anything. No one needs to. You're in the feathered pit, a punishment so peculiar, so absurdly theatrical. It could only exist in an empire this rich and this cruel. What you're about to endure is called feathering by the featherless. The first prisoner approaches a skeletal man with a twisted shoulder and 2 bottom teeth. He holds what looks like a rib from a buzzard, sharpened on one end, stained with something dark and permanent. He doesn't speak. He simply raises the bone and drags it slowly across your arm. The sensation is somewhere between a scrape and a tickle light, but deep enough to leave a faint red trail. Then, the next prisoner takes a turn. Then the next. This isn't torture in the classic sense. It's not pain that slams into you. It's slow, creeping. 1,000 light scrapes with bones that catch on your skin. Not enough to bleed yet, but enough to tell your nerves something is wrong. It's a ritual. It always is. Historians still argue whether this act was designed for humiliation, slow disfigurement, or some kind of metaphysical exorcism by abrasion. Whatever the intent, it's unforgettable. Your body becomes a canvas for prisoners who've likely experienced worse. They scrape you without malice, without passion, just duty or boredom. After the first hour, your skin is red, all over an angry, inflamed surface, sensitive to even the breeze. You want to scream, but you don't, because the next part involves feathers from a basket. A young woman, bald, blind in one eye, pulls handfuls of gray, greasy feathers and begins pressing them to your raw skin. They stick instantly. You realize, with growing horror, that your wounds were never meant to bleed, just enough abrasion to adhere. Then they make you dance. A drumbeat starts slow, uneven. A prisoner tugs your wrist. You stumble into motion, arms flapping weakly, feet dragging through dust. You look ridiculous. That's the point. A mock bird, a punished peacock. You are danced around the courtyard, feathers fluttering from your chest, back, legs. You look like a rejected festival decoration. They call it the molt, a shedding of pride, of ego, of skin. And then comes the salt. They don't throw it. That would be merciful. They paint it on, with brushes, dipped in warm water and brine, stroke after stroke across your back, your thighs, your feathered shoulders. The sting is exquisite. You howl. Finally, the crowd murmurs approval. Someone clap politely. It's the governor's wife. You collapse. You expect them to stop. They don't. They lift you, place you gently in a shallow pit, lined with soft sand and more feathers. They wrap you in gauze, soaked in some unknown potion, cool, fragrant, utterly ineffective. Then, one by one, each prisoner who scraped you whispers something. You don't understand most of it. Names, regrets, a few whisper jokes. One sings softly, a lullaby. You cry. That night, under a canopy of stars, you lie there, wrapped like a roasted fowl, blinking through tears and feather dust. You think about birds, about freedom, about flight. Then you remember how birds are caged. The next morning, a scribe arrives with a scroll. It says you're free. Just like that. No explanation. No signature. You're unwrapped and dressed in a simple robe, dyed blue with gold thread. People bow as you pass. You're escorted to a bathhouse where attendants scrub your raw skin with crushed olives and prayer. The pain is blinding, but the water is warm, and the oil they pour over you smells like lemon and pine. You ask what happens next. They say, you're to attend court. You're art now. Apparently, the governor liked the punishment so much. You've been selected for display, not as a prisoner, as inspiration. Your back, still red with crisscrossed scrapes, becomes a visual warning. You're seated in a niche behind the royal bench. During trials, people glance over. We remember what happens to those who mock the palace and choose silence. They call you Feather. Your job is to sit, shirtless, still, occasionally blink. Once a week, an artist adds fresh paint to your scars. Decorative. Fashionable. A new pattern each month. But they don't touch the feather scars. Those, apparently, are sacred now. You stay in court for 5 years. You hear 1,000 cases. Watch 100 punishments. Some worse than yours. Some laughable. Then, one day, the king dies. The new one abolishes symbolic sentencing. You're dismissed. You return to the village. You barely remember. Skin weathered. Eyes hollow. Walking like a man haunted by birdsong. Children ask you to spin, to show the dance. You do it once. Slowly. They laugh. You cry. Eventually, you grow feathers again. Not real ones, but figurative. You build a wind chime that whistles like the punishment drum. You plant trees. You feed birds by hand. And when they land on you, soft claws on scarred shoulders, you hold your breath. They stay. They place the dagger in your palm as if offering a gift. It is beautiful, gilded, perfectly balanced. Its hilt wrapped in thin strands of polished lapis lazuli. The blade catches the torchlight and reflects it like a mirror made for royalty. The guards say nothing. The judge says nothing. The crowd that's gathered leans forward slightly, hungry for your next move. You just stand there, blinking, sweating, wondering why your knees are suddenly very interested in buckling. This is the Golden Dagger trial. And the rule is simple. You're given the weapon and told to use it wisely. What exactly wisely means is never explained. That's the fun of it. It's not justice. It's a riddle with consequences. They say this punishment, if you can even call it, that was reserved for philosophers, tricksters, and poets who offended the court with wordplay too clever for their own good. You fall into the second category, a clever verse, a cleverer pun about the royal archivist's peculiar love of fish-based metaphors. People laughed. He did not. Now you hold the blade. And everyone waits. Historians still argue whether the golden dagger was real or metaphor, an execution disguised as a test of wit, or a theatrical lesson in restraint. One popular theory suggests no one ever solved it. Another insists at least one man used it to shave a judge's beard and was promptly promoted. The guard gestures. Begin. You eye the judge. He's old, bored, one eyebrow slightly raised, daring you to guess wrong. His hands rest casually on a scroll, fingers twitching, ever so slightly. You could stab him. That's what they want. Or maybe that's what they want you to think they want. You could stab yourself. Maybe it's about self-sacrifice. Seems dramatic. Even for Persia, you briefly consider using it to cut your bonds. But you aren't tied. Not physically, just psychologically, socially, cosmically. You look at the dagger. Then, carefully, slowly, you walk to the center of the courtroom, kneel, and place the blade flat on the floor. The crowd gasps. The judge leans forward. You speak. "A golden dagger til Zeus, no blood." Only reflection. Silence. The judge stares at you. You stare back. A pause. Then, he claps. Once, twice. The rest follow. You are escorted out of the chamber with no chains. No wounds. Just applause. A eunuch in gold-trimmed robes follows you to the gates and whispers, "No one's ever tried that before." You blink. "What happens now?" you ask. He shrugs. "We're not sure." They give you the dagger. You carry it home in a lacquered case, like a cursed heirloom. You expect this to be the end of it. It's not. A week later, a courier delivers an invitation. You're to be a judge in the next Golden Dagger trial. Yes. Really. You arrive nervous, curious. They sit you on a marble bench beside two older men, both with sun-leathered faces and identical ceremonial sandals. You're handed a scroll of procedures. There are none. The first case is a young musician who compared the Queen's voice to a very charming goat. You hand him the dagger. He juggles it. The older judges frown. He stabs a melon. You stare. Dismissed. Someone says, another case. A sculptor who carved the king with suspiciously tiny ears. She kisses the blade, keeps it, leaves. You start to see the logic, or at least the performance. It's not about crime or guilt. It's about how you answer absurdity with grace. The dagger is a test of improvisation, of poise, of the ability to navigate violence without touching it. You become good at reading people. The tremble in the fingers, the twitch in the jaw, the ones who crack the moment they grip the hilt, the ones who pause and think, the ones who laugh and say, "No, thank you." Over time, your title changes. From dagger recipient to golden arbiter. People ask you for wisdom. You offer riddles. You still sleep poorly. You keep the dagger beneath your pillow, just in case. But it doesn't end there. Years pass. You are summoned again. This time not as judge, not as guest, as subject. A letter arrives. Your remarks about the royal chariot's resemblance to a goat cart have been overheard. You laugh, softly, then stop laughing. Fast. They bring you in. The courtroom looks the same. So does the dagger. You take it. Hold it. Feel its familiar weight. Everyone watches. You kneel. You raise the dagger, and you trim your fingernail. One clean stroke. You hold the nail up for inspection. The judge smirks. Approved. The crowd applauds. You bow, return the dagger, and walk out unwounded. Unbeaten. The unkillable poet. They'll probably name a riddle after you, and somewhere, in a box of cedar and silk, that dagger waits. You don't cry at the funeral. Not hard enough. Anyway, that's the problem. You wept. Yes. You tore your robe, nodded solemnly through the chants, bowed at the right verses, but your tears were not sufficient. Not for the Queen, not for the one they called the Jewel of Persepolis. You assumed, foolishly, that grief was a private affair. That mourning could be a quiet thing. But in the Persian court, mourning is theater. The louder your sorrow, the deeper your loyalty. And so now, here you are, kneeling on a stone platform before a tribunal of professional mourners, about to be punished for a crime called emotional insufficiency in the presence of royal tragedy. The chamber smells of roses and mildew. The air is still, too still. Above you, a frieze depicts Ahura Mazda blessing a row of obedient supplicants, each one weeping dutifully. Perfectly posed. It mocks you. You imagine your own likeness carved beside them. Fast dry. A single eyebrow raised just slightly too high. They probably already started the sketches. You try to protest. I cried. You murmur. Your voice raw from repeating it for days. One of the mourners waves her hand lazily. Your tears were weak, decorative, hollow. Another adds. The Queen's cat cried harder. You try to reply, but it's too late. A thin woman in deep blue robe steps forward, holding a lidded clay bowl. This is the first stage, the tears of correction. They paint your face with an irritant derived from crushed onions, fermented dates, and desert chili. It burns instantly, blinding your vision, forcing tears to stream down your face. There, someone says, "Now that looks sincere." You scream. That's not part of the plan. Apparently, a priest smacks a gong. 2 attendants hold you upright while the substance works. It's not enough to make you cry. It must drain you. Leave your tear ducts raw, reddened, publicly rehabilitated. They want to empty your emotional reservoir in front of an audience. After the tears, you're wrapped in thick woolen robes, dyed black and led through the city barefoot. Your role, professional mourner for the Queen. Your destination, every fountain, shrine, and government building. At each stop, you must wail, not whisper, not sigh, full-throated, shoulder-heaving. Grief on parade, lamentation. If you falter, you're whipped lightly on the back of the knees with a reed soaked in mint oil. For vocal clarity, the handler says, at first, you're embarrassed. People stare. Children mimic you. But by the 3rd location, an alley shrine dedicated to the moon, you start to lean into it. Your voice cracks. You shout to the heavens. You sob until you cough. It's exhausting. It's cathartic. You're not even sure if you're still faking. But it's not over. At sunset, you are led back to the palace to face the final act, the Chamber of Echoes. It's a round, dome-roofed hall, built entirely of limestone, engineered so that every sound multiplies. They place you in the center. A single scribe stands nearby with a scroll. Begin, he says. You're to recount your grief for the Queen, for her cat, for the day she dropped her necklace into a fountain and you failed to catch it. All of it, loudly, repeatedly. The chamber catches your every syllable and throws it back at you. Dozens of versions of your voice ricocheting off the stone like ghosts of better mourners. You begin to shake, not from pain though your knees ache, but from the sheer absurdity of it. Your own voice shouting back. Distorted. Accusing. Absurd. You laugh. A mistake. The scribe gasps. Laughter in the echo chamber is heresy. Instantly, the gong rings again. You're muzzled with soft leather straps and left kneeling in the center of the room overnight. When they retrieve you, you're hoarse, delirious, drenched in sweat. They don't speak to you. They simply guide you to a small balcony where 3 other insufficient mourners sit quietly, watching the city move on without them. You are fed cold barley, your face wiped clean by silent attendants. No more rebukes, no more tears. A week later, a courier delivers a scroll. You have been deemed adequately grieved. No name, no seal, just the verdict. You are, officially, cleansed, allowed to return to life. But everything feels different. You walk through markets and see people crying for spilled wine, for cracked plates, for a spilled secret, and you wonder, are they really crying or performing? You touch your own cheek and find it dry. Permanently, it seems. You try to cry at a puppet show. Nothing. You burn your tongue on hot tea. Nothing. Even when your dog dies, all you do is nod and whisper. He would have hated the Queen's cat. You take work as a calligrapher. inscribing death announcements. You write them with calm, elegant strokes. Occasionally, nobles request you add appropriate weeping flourish. You charge extra. People begin to call you the Dry One. A philosopher visits you once. "Oh, curious. How did it feel?" he asks. "To be punished for not crying." You shrug. Eventually, you say, "It stopped being punishment." He nods solemnly, writes something in a scroll, and leaves, probably to turn it into a quote he'll claim as his own. Years later, when another queen dies, you are invited by name to the mourning procession. You decline. Instead, you walk to the edge of the city, sit by a dry well, and speak softly to the stone. No tears, no lament, just truth. She had a terrible singing voice. The chariot is already waiting for you when they drag you from your cell massive, gold-plated, and covered in reliefs of lions, stars, and triumphant kings stomping on writhing enemies. It gleams like a sun-blind dream, hitched to two white horses, so polished they look like they've never even sneezed. A ceremonial banner flaps lazily above it, embroidered with the king's motto, "He who rides above all," which, in this case, will include you, just not in the way you might prefer. You're not here to ride in the chariot. You're here to be tied underneath it. This is the punishment of the royal undercarriage, sometimes called the ceremonial shock absorber. And it's every bit as undignified as it sounds. It's not officially listed in the Empire's code of law. It doesn't need to be. It's the personal favorite of satraps and nobles looking to make a point about supporting royal authority. You made the mistake of interrupting a court parade by sneezing. During a speech, they said you were coughing doubt into the ears of glory. You said you had hay fever. Now you're here. The driver doesn't speak. He just gestures to the plank beneath the chariot, the long wooden beam reinforced with bronze brackets and a row of leather straps. You're told to lie on your back, arms tucked to your sides. Your face will point forward. Your knees will hang just above the axle. You are not to scream, spit, or blink excessively during the procession. You are to uphold the dignity of your station as a living cushion between monarchy and cobblestone. Historians still argue whether this punishment evolved from ancient funerary customs, where animals or slaves were placed beneath royal vehicles to absorb impurity. Some scholars believe it was purely symbolic, a way to show that even treasonous citizens could still serve the empire, just not from a standing position. The chariot rolls forward. At first, it's not so bad. The horses trot gently. The wheels creak in a rhythmic hum. Your back presses against the plank. You breathe shallowly. Then the first bump hits a minor divot in the path, and your skull knocks lightly against the wood. The driver doesn't slow down. Soon the road becomes rougher. Stones, potholes, random temple offerings dropped by trembling villagers. Each jolt sends a vibration through your spine like a chorus of cymbals crashing inside your ribs. You bite your tongue by accident. It bleeds. The crowd lines the boulevard. They cheer. They throw petals. One child shouts, "Look, Mother." It's the royal footstool. The mother hushes him, but not fast enough. You lock eyes with her. Upside down. She winces. You think about rolling off, but the straps hold you tight. Your arms are numb. Your thoughts scatter every time a wheel rolls over a stone. The chariot reaches the main plaza. A grand turn is coming. You know this because the crowd roars. The horns blare. and the driver tugs sharply on the reins. The horses pivot. The axle grinds. Your body lurches sideways. You nearly vomit. Then the chariot slows. For a moment, you believe it's over. Then you realize they're only stopping for the ceremonial speech. The king rises from a balcony. He spreads his arms. Today, we celebrate strength, support, sacrifice. He pauses. We ride because others carry. His gaze drifts down to the chariot. To you. Everyone claps. You want to die. Then, the ride resumes faster this time. Heading downhill. The momentum adds a new flavor of pain. Every bump is a slap to your organs. Your vision blurs. You hallucinate being crushed by enormous papyrus scrolls. You wonder if your teeth are still inside your mouth, somewhere on the outer rim of the city. A wheel catches a rock and jumps. The chariot tilts. You scream. The crowd laughs. Eventually, the ride ends. The chariot coasts to a halt near the Temple of Justice. You are unstrapped carefully, almost lovingly, and rolled onto the ground like overripe fruit. A physician pokes you with a stylus. You grunt. He nods. Still useful. He says, you're carried on a litter back to your cell, where a jar of ointment and a soft towel await you. Someone leaves a fig. You cry, just a little, for days afterward. Your spine throbs like a drum. You can't lie flat. You sleep propped against a wall, arms crossed like a suspicious statue. A small group of students visits your cell and asks what it felt like. Dignifying. You wheeze. They nod and scribble furiously. Word spreads. You become a metaphor. Poets write verses comparing loyalty to the strength beneath wheels. Playwrights stage reenactments of your punishment, though they use pigs instead of people. A sculptor carves a relief of the chariot scene and titles it The Backbone of Empire. You are not invited to the unveiling. Eventually, the king dies. His successor abolishes public corporal punishment, calling it no longer fashionable. But the chariot is kept in the palace museum. Visitors gaze at the plank beneath it and whisper, "That's where he rode." You smile, crookedly, and never sit in a cart again. They dress you in clean robes. That's your first clue. Something is wrong. The fabric is soft. The color solemn gray with black edging. The kind of outfit reserved for ceremonial duties or burial. You're led into a long hall, lit by flickering oil lamps. The air heavy with incense and candle smoke. At the far end stands a dais with 3 thrones, each flanked by spearmen in dark crimson cloaks. But it's not the living you've come to see. It's the dead. This is the court of the departed, a rarely invoked but fully legal tribunal where the testimony of the deceased is not only accepted, it's required. Your crime, something so petty, it's almost impressive you were accused of theft by a merchant who died before the trial. Most would consider that the end of it, but not here. In Persia, certain officials believe that a dead witness is still a witness and can be compelled to testify through ritual and presentation. You begin to sweat. Historians still argue whether this practice was superstition, legal theater, or a clever tool to keep public loyalty through fear. What's certain is this: when a dead man accuses you, you show up to court. You're brought forward and told to kneel on a velvet mat stitched with the Zoroastrian symbol of judgment. The priest, an ancient man with eyes like boiled pearls, gestures to the side. 2 attendants emerge, dragging something between them, wrapped in linen. Stiff and misshapen, the merchant. He's been dressed for court. His body, dried and preserved with salt and resin, has been propped upright on a wooden frame. His head leans awkwardly, his jaw fixed open in what could generously be interpreted as a scowl. His hands, stuffed with straw, are posed mid-gesture, as if pointing directly at you. A scribe reads from a scroll this man. In life, accused the defendant of stealing 3 bolts of dyed silk. His grievance was recorded. His testimony sealed. Then comes the bizarre part. A puppeteer enters. Yes, an actual puppeteer failed. Silent, holding thin golden rods. With practiced grace, they slide the rods into the dead man's sleeves and begin to manipulate his arms. One finger points at you, then the other, then both. The crowd murmurs. He insists. Someone whispers. You try not to laugh. The priest frowns at your raised eyebrows. The scribe continues. We will now allow cross-examination. Wait. What? They hand you a list of questions and instruct you to ask the corpse directly. You glance around. But everyone seems to be taking this quite seriously. You clear your throat. Did I steal your silk? The puppeteer jerks the corpse's head in a nodding motion. You sputter. Did you? Perhaps misplace it. The head shakes violently. You try logic. Is it possible you were bribed to falsely accuse me? The jaw clacks open, then slowly closes. The priest nods. The witness declines to answer. By now, sweat is soaking through your ceremonial robe. Then they bring in the evidence, 3 bolts of silk, beautifully dyed and folded, placed ceremonially on a low table. You've never seen them before in your life. A woman, one of the merchant's former rivals, approaches and says, These were found in a storage room under your name. You try to protest, but the priest waves a hand. The dead man swore they were stolen. He now confirms it. You are silent, because what else can you do? They ask the corpse for a sentencing recommendation. This involves rotating its arm in a particular gesture that, apparently, symbolizes ritual servitude, which is how you end up sentenced to service beneath the dead. What that means, in practical terms, is that you are placed in a crypt not entombed, but hired tasked with maintaining the ceremonial honor of buried officials. You sweep the floors, polish tomb plaques, refill oil lamps. You sleep beside sarcophagi. Occasionally, you're asked to repaint a face on a fading burial mask. Once, you sew a robe for a skeleton so its children can weep beside it with dignity. You are paid in food and silence. Months pass. You learn things. How to read a corpse's posture. How to detect if a finger was arranged in gesture of accusation versus warning. You learn that some noble families update the complaints of their dead relatives by placing tiny scrolls in their mouths. One morning, you find a mummy with 3 new charges tucked between its teeth. One of them is against you for improper cleaning of a crypt step. You apologize to the corpse. One day, a philosopher visits. He asks what it's like to serve the dead. You say, at least they don't talk behind your back. He writes it down, calls it profound. Eventually, the court invites you back. The merchant's body has decayed further. His frame is brittle. The puppeteer bows and says they can no longer manipulate him without risk of collapse. He's losing structural integrity. The priest says solemnly, a rare pardon is offered. You are declared absolved through decomposition. Your record is cleared. You are free. You walk out, blinking into the sunlight. Everything feels too loud, too fast, too alive. People recognize you. Children point. That's the man who worked for the dead. Old women touch their foreheads as you pass. You become a folk tale. If you lie, mothers whisper. You'll end up like the one who mopped bones. You find work carving headstones. It feels appropriate. You never again speak ill of the dead. You also never accept dyed silk from anyone. Ever again. They bring you to the Hall of Names at dawn. When the sun is barely touching, the marble pillars and the scent of myrrh still lingers in the corners of the stone. You're led barefoot, robed, and shivering from the cold, though truthfully, it's not the air that chills you. It's the silence, the kind that gathers just before something final. You stand on a raised dais in front of the court of dignitaries, where scrolls unfurl like long serpents, and every name must be spoken perfectly. Your job was ceremonial reader. Nothing more. You recited ancestral titles before banquets, whispered formal epithets during offerings, pronounced blessings at the foot of thrones. You've spoken more names than most people can remember. But last week, you slipped. Just once. You mispronounced the name of Sharashanasp, the elder, adding a single syllable where none should have lived. A slurred consonant, barely audible, almost forgivable, except it wasn't. The man's descendants, a proud and humorless family, heard it during a tribute rite. One of them gasped. Another fainted theatrically. A third filed a formal complaint within the hour. And now, by order of the royal court, you're here for what they call phonetic correction, what others call the piercing of precision. They say the Persians revered names as sacred architecture, syllables stacked like stone. To alter one is to chip at a tomb, to insult lineage, to fray the divine thread. Mispronunciation is a slow blasphemy. And so, tradition dictates that the tongue be taught through pain. You try to plead your case, say the name again. Correctly this time. Crisp and clear, but your judges only raise their hands to signal silence. They've heard too many apologies. The only correction now is the ritual and the spear. The executioner arrives dressed in formal black, with golden script painted across his chest, the ancient alphabet spiraling down his arms like vines. He carries the correction spear, thin and gleaming, its tip narrow but deadly sharp, designed not to kill, but to touch the space between skin and obedience. He walks in slow circles around you, while a scribe recites the family's lineage, each name pronounced flawlessly, each syllable stabbing more than any blade. You flinch every time your own stumble is referenced, a kind of echo that refuses to die. They do not begin with the spear. That would be barbaric. First, they make you listen. You kneel before a stone tablet, onto which the name you mangled is carved dozens of times. Each instance identical. Precise. Immaculate. A cantor steps forward and begins to chant it over and over, in rising and falling tones, forcing you to hear what perfect diction sounds like. With each repetition, your shame thickens. You hear the name in your bones now, printed across the inside of your skull. You could write it backward, sing it in your sleep. Still, it is not enough. You're then made to hold the name in your mouth, literally. A scroll with the family's name printed in ink and ash is rolled and inserted between your teeth. You must keep it there, while standing on one leg for the duration of the ceremonial chorus. A 10-minute hymn written by a prince with a fondness for complex rhythm. You manage the first few verses. But when your foot trembles and your arms begin to shake, the scroll falls. It unrolls on the marble like a snake. And the court gasps. You've dropped the name again. A metaphor. They say, made literal. And now comes the spear. They tie your arms behind your back, not tightly. Just enough to keep you from flailing. The executioner approaches and lifts the spear, positioning the tip against the soft space just beneath your chin. He does not jab. He waits. You're instructed to speak the name again. Clearly, from memory, without error. The crowd leans forward. You open your mouth. The name rises like smoke. You reach the final syllable and falter barely, but the inflection dips half a note. The executioner hears it. Everyone hears it. The spear presses into your skin, piercing the top layer, drawing a thread of blood that drips like ink. You freeze. The judge nods. The ritual continues. Now you're made to sit with the scrolls. You must copy the name 100 times. By hand. With a quill dipped in a paste made from your own blood. Every letter must be perfect. Every accent mark visible. If the ink bleeds or the lines are crooked, the copy is burned and restarted. Your hand cramps. Your eyes blur. You write until you cannot feel your fingers. The last scroll is collected and read aloud. Your version finally matches the original. You are permitted to rise. But they are not finished. The final step is branding. A small rod, shaped in the first letter of the mispronounced name, is heated over a brazier. You're made to bite down on a strip of leather while the red-hot seal is pressed to your shoulder. It sizzles, beats deep, and leaves a mark the size of a coin. The smell of burnt skin fills the hall. Someone recites a prayer. Someone else applauds softly. You don't cry. You've already wept all the water from your body. Now, you simply collapse. When you wake, you're in a recovery chamber, lined with soft rugs and gentle torchlight. A physician applies a cooling balm to your wound. You ask what happens now. He shrugs. That depends on how well you speak. You're reassigned, not to the public chamber, but to the archives. You spend your days in silence, restoring broken tablets, copying names you no longer dare to misread. Your tongue feels too heavy now. Your mouth hesitant, cautious with every vowel. A boy once asks you your own name. You pose, then whisper it syllable by syllable, checking your own pronunciation as if afraid someone is listening. One day, a court official visits. He asks if you'd consider tutoring nobles' children in proper court diction. He says you've become a symbol of verbal discipline. You decline. You have no interest in being a living cautionary tale. But he insists. The pay is good. You accept. Reluctantly. The children giggle at first, mimicking your scar, trying to twist their mouths into exaggerated versions of imperial names. You let them laugh. Then you teach. And slowly, their tones sharpen. Their posture straightens. They stop snickering. One day, one of them says a name so perfectly, so reverently, that you nearly weep. Not from fear, from relief. You grow old in the archive tower. No, more missteps. No more ceremonies. But each night before sleep, you repeat the name in your head like a prayer. Not out of fear, out of habit, because now, to forget it would be worse than punishment. It would mean it was all for nothing. It begins with a hiccup, just one. Awkward, ill-timed, and echoing off the mosaic-tiled wall of the banquet hall, like an insult wrapped in indigestion. You were mid-toast, halfway through a florid tribute to the satrap of Parthava, when your diaphragm betrayed you. The nobles laughed. Politely, you tried to continue. Hiccuped again. Louder this time, spraying a drop of wine across the tablecloth. The laughter stopped. The satrap's wife scowled. You hiccuped a third time. Then tried to make a joke. Clearly, the gods wished to interrupt. No one laughed. By the end of the night, you'd been escorted away from the feast and into a holding chamber. Your mouth parched, your stomach fluttering like a frightened bird. The next morning, they inform you of the sentence you are to endure, the trial of the Tower of Eternal Hiccups. A punishment reserved for those who mock decorum with uncontrolled noises. Apparently, it's considered a form of disrespect, even if involuntary. You ask if this is a joke. The warden does not smile. The tower isn't tall. It's round and squat, shaped more like a silo than a fortress. It sits on the edge of the city, where the wind never quite stops, humming through cracks and stone vents with a mournful whistle that already makes your throat tighten. You're stripped of your formal robes, dressed in a simple linen tunic, and led inside. The inner chamber is circular, smooth-walled, with no windows, and a ceiling that tapers like a funnel above your head. A bronze bowl hangs from a hook in the center. Its purpose isn't clear until the first hic escapes your throat, echoing upward and striking the bowl with a perfectly tuned clang. A guard nods in approval. It begins. They give you nothing but water served warm, with a trace of a bitter herb whose taste lingers at the back of your throat. You hiccup again. Louder. The sound ricochets upward and rings the bowl once more. It's not an accident. The herb is milk, a spiky little root that Persians use in folk medicine to induce vomiting and, apparently, hiccups. You're told this is day one of your induction. The more you hiccup, the more your body associates the discomfort with shame. The goal is behavioral correction through embarrassment and audio fatigue. You hiccup a third time, this one dry and painful. The bowl rings again, every hour. A servant enters with a fresh goblet of milk water. Sometimes they add ground chili, or a dash of sour pomegranate syrup. Sometimes just warm goat's milk laced with vinegar. Each concoction designed not to nourish, but to provoke. You hiccup in your sleep, in your breath. Between words, you mutter to yourself in desperation. The sound follows you, and with every metallic ring above, you feel yourself shrinking inside your own skin. The bowl mocks you. The bowl listens. On the second day, they begin the echo treatment. Hidden vents in the walls funnel your hiccups back into the chamber, delayed by seconds, so that every time you speak or breathe, your own erratic voice interrupts you. You try to meditate. You hiccup. You try to sing. You hiccup. You try to think in silence. Hic. The bowl answers. Constant and faithful. You begin to twitch every time you hear your own breath. You ask to leave. The guards smile. Not until the body forgets how to hiccup. By the third day, your ribs ache. Your throat is raw. You've lost all sense of time. The milk water is now accompanied by gentle massages, applied by silent attendants whose job is to press into your diaphragm and apply unpredictable pressure. Sometimes they tickle, Sometimes they poke. Sometimes they press so hard you gasp and hiccup from sheer panic. It's all carefully measured. They take notes. Historians still argue whether this punishment was meant to cure or to humiliate. The official stance is that it teaches self-control, that it restores harmony between body and empire. But in practice, it feels like an elaborate prank, delivered by serious men. There's a popular joke among merchants that if you hiccup while reading a contract, you'll end up in the tower with your signature tattooed on your tongue. You're beginning to think that joke isn't far from reality. By day 4, the herbs begin to have other effects. You sweat constantly. You twitch at sounds. Your dreams are filled with rhythmic noises, metal, striking metal. Your own mouth opening against your will. A tower full of echoing fools. You begin to hallucinate that the bowl above is growing, expanding like a second moon, threatening to swallow the ceiling. When you hiccup now, the sound feels like it originates in your bones. A priest visits. He asks you to recite a prayer without interruption. You fail on the 3rd syllable. He clucks his tongue. Not ready, he says, and leaves you a fresh bowl of milk with extra ginger. It burns all the way down. On the 5th day, something shifts. The hiccups slow. Your diaphragm no longer spasms at every thought. You sip water cautiously. 1 hour passes. Then 2. You begin to feel hopeful. You sit in silence. You think clearly for the first time in days. Then a bird calls outside. Its cry mimics your hiccup exactly. You jump. You hiccup. The bowl chimes. You cry. The final test comes on the 7th morning. You are brought before a panel of scribes. Each reads a sentence aloud, tongue twisters. Phrases of power. Names of gods and nobles. You must repeat each without interruption. You manage 4. On the 5th, Sharafashmak, son of Shenaz the Spicer, you hiccup on the shay. The scribes look at one another. One says, residual. Another says, low-grade retention. You're made to drink a final draught of milk, mixed with goat bile, and sent back to the tower for 1 more night. But the next morning, you do it. You speak an entire verse, without faltering. The bowl is silent. The room is still. A guard nods. Discharge. You're released. Your body is shaky. Your eyes sunken. Your diaphragm suspicious of even breathing too deep. You avoid carbonated drinks for the rest of your life. You never again laugh with your mouth open. Back in the city, no one mocks you. Not openly. But you catch glances people who recognize your gait, your hunched posture, your tendency to clutch your ribs when surprised. Some call you the belle. Others whisper, that's the one the bowl liked. You take up work as a librarian. It's quiet. You file scrolls. You practice breathing. You shush anyone who coughs more than twice. Eventually, someone hiccups in the reading hall. Everyone looks at you. You rise. You hand them a cup of water. No words. They drink. They wait. The hiccups stop. They bow. And you exhale. Slowly. Carefully. Like a man learning silence all over again. You wake to find a wax tablet at your door, sealed with the mark of the Royal Office of Measurements. That's never good. No one wants a visit from the Department of Precision. You rub your eyes and break the seal. The summons is brief. Inconsistent standardization of weights reported. Present yourself for recalibration. You sigh. You sell grain. A humble merchant. A fair one. 2. You've used the same bronze scale for years, passed down from your father, who swore it had been blessed by a priest of Ahura Mazda himself. But apparently, someone, perhaps a disgruntled customer, perhaps a competitor with too much free time, has reported your weights as being off by a significant margin. You scoff. A barley kernel's difference at most. But the Empire does not scoff. It sends you for the judgment of balance. The tribunal chamber is carved entirely from limestone, cold and geometric. No incense here. No decorative flair. Just columns, benches, and an altar bearing a single gleaming balance scale flanked by 2 towering measuring rods, 1 copper, 1 ivory. Each represents one aspect of divine measurement, utility, and purity. You are led to a platform where your own scale, now confiscated, is displayed in public view, resting on a black cloth like a criminal. It looks small and fragile under the judging eyes of the officials, who are dressed in robes of deep gray, the color of dusty law. The head surveyor steps forward. He is bald, with one of those humorless mouths that looks like it's never seen a plum. You stand accused, he says, of deviating from the imperial standard by 4 drams per mina. You try to respond, but he raises a finger. Weigh first. Speak later. They place your grain weight on one side of the imperial scale. On the other side, the official weight block, stamped with the royal seal. The beam tips, not by much, just a twitch, but enough to matter. A murmur runs through the chamber. You feel a bead of sweat gather at your temple. Historians still argue whether this tribunal was designed to ensure fairness or reinforce the myth of bureaucratic infallibility. Either way, the effect is the same. The system is always right. You are always almost right, which is worse. You're handed a tablet chiseled with your infractions, variance in volume, unapproved local stone and counterweights, improper greasing of scale pin. Each item is scored as a Tier 2 violation. Cumulatively, that qualifies you for the ritual penalty, the calibration of flesh. Your knees go soft. They lead you into a side chamber where a wooden apparatus, shaped like a giant scale, is suspended by ropes. You are told to disrobe. One side of the scale will hold your clothed body. The other will be slowly weighted until the 2 sides balance. To determine your value, they say. Symbolically, they add, which doesn't help. You stand awkwardly on the platform, the ropes creaking above you. On the other side, they begin to add weights. Small bronze ingots first, then pebbles, then sand poured from a jug. You feel the platform shudder beneath your feet. The idea is not to hurt you. Not exactly. But the longer you stand, the more the symbolism sinks in. You are being priced. You are being measured. As a thing, when the balance finally levels, a bell is rung. The weights are counted aloud. You are declared to be worth 79 units of standardized honesty. You don't know what that means. No one does. But it's less than 80. And the room records it in ink and wax. You are now officially below average in integrity. Next comes the ink. Your right palm is painted with a crimson glyph, a small scale tipped to one side. It is a temporary tattoo. They assure you, will fade in a few moons. But everyone who sees it will know this is someone whose measure was faulty. You return to your stall in the marketplace. Business is slow. People glance at your hand. Some ask politely whether your weights have been replaced. Others avoid you entirely. A few bring their own tiny scales. setting them beside yours, with the kind of expression usually reserved for wild dogs. You grit your teeth and weigh everything twice. One afternoon, a child asks if he can see the imperial balance. You laugh and say, "I've seen it up close." It doesn't laugh back. He doesn't understand. He offers you a dried fig. You give him an extra handful of barley. It balances out. Soon after, an imperial clerk returns with an offer. They are assembling a council of merchants who have undergone recalibration. You are to serve as an example, an advisor to others in the art of precise morality. You think it's a trick. It is, but the pay is good, and your stall is dying. You accept. You spend your days now in a sunlit office, reviewing weights submitted by rural traders, nodding sagely when their balances tip a hair too far. You carry a miniature scale around your neck like a relic. You weigh words. You weigh time. You speak with caution. You hesitate often. Precision becomes your habit. One day, your palm tattoo finally fades. You trace the ghost of the mark. You realize you miss it. It reminded you of something like humility. You still dream about the balance chamber of standing there, while invisible hands weigh your worth. In the dreams, the scale never balances. It keeps tipping, 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 until you vanish entirely. You wake up sweating. You go to the market. You buy a new set of weights. Then, you weigh the air for fun, just to feel something tip. They say the Persians love a good contract, not just the signing of it, but the poetry, the flourishes, the way a properly inked clause can make grown bureaucrats weep. And within that world of wax seals and curling script lives the most dreaded clause of all the clause of the living signature. You only hear of it when someone truly messes up, when an oath is broken not by accident, but by arrogance, deception, or, as in your case, just forgetting to read the fine print. You were late delivering temple grain by one day. Just one. The high priest insisted that even the stars keep better schedules. Unfortunately, the grain was earmarked under a sacred logistics contract, one that invoked the living signature clause if breached. And now, you're summoned. The court chamber for contractual violation is nothing like the others. There's no throne, no spear, no incense, smoke curling dramatically into the rafters. Just desk. Endless rows of desks. Scribes hunched like vultures over parchment. Quills tapping. The soft scratch of ink against paper. In the center of it all is a table bearing the original contract, a ribbon still looped around its spine. A man in a silver robe gestures for you to sit. His voice is calm. You violated a timed clause. Standard restitution is enacted. You don't even ask what that means. You simply swallow and nod. Already tired, they begin by reading the entire contract aloud. Every word, every subclause, every exception. You must repeat each sentence after them, as proof you understand. Mispronounce one word, and they start again. It takes hours. Your throat dries. You stumble over technical terms, like bonded yield per astral cycle and reverent humidity allowances. By the end, your brain feels like it's stuffed with shredded scrolls. Then comes the signature. Not just the one you wrote, but you. Now, officially considered, the living embodiment of your contractual failure. You are to become the signature itself, which is not a metaphor. Historians still debate whether this punishment was symbolic or spiritual in origin. Some think it came from a Zoroastrian principle that words bind the soul. Others argue it was simply a bureaucratic flex taken too far. Either way, the result is the same. Your body becomes a seal. The artisans arrive. First, they stretch your arms overhead and dip your fingers in warm wax. Each fingertip is pressed onto a parchment stamped with the sacred seal of breach. That would be strange enough. But it's only the beginning. Next, a block of soft clay is brought out, and your feet are pressed into it, an official footprint, to be baked and filed in the archives. Then, a golden stylus is heated until it glows red. The scribe tilts your head gently and begins etching a copy of your original signature into your left shoulder. Slowly, backward, so it will read properly in a mirror. It burns. You don't scream. You can't. You've been told that a true signature must be dignified. You're then brought to a public square and tied, arms outstretched, in front of a giant contract carved in stone. For the next 3 days, you are required to recite your entire agreement from memory, once per hour, while temple officials observe. If you forget a line, you're lashed lightly, not hard, just enough to underline the error. The worst part isn't the pain. It's the crowd. Children laugh. Vendors shout mock clauses. 2 figs for the bearer of expired contracts. One yells. You don't reply. You are, after all, still under oath. On the final day, you're led back to the office of records. Your voice is gone. Your lips are cracked. They sit you before a slab of stone, bearing a fresh copy of your contract. Read, says the clerk. You do. Word perfect. Despite the buzzing in your ears, you have completed the clause. He says, your signature has been honored. Your name is restored. You nod, exhausted. But just as you stand, a junior clerk frowns and raises a hand. There's a secondary clause, she says. The room falls silent. A secondary clause. You close your eyes. She reads it aloud. In the event of future breach, the bearer shall serve as template and trainer for all new initiates in the Office of Contracts. You are handed a robe, a stylus, a scroll. You are now a teacher. Your office is small, windowless, filled with ink pots and the smell of hot parchment. Your job is to scare apprentices. You show them your branded shoulder, your scarred fingers, the slow stiffness in your jaw from over-repetition. You make them read until their voices crack. You become, paradoxically, a beloved instructor. They call you Master Footnote. Once, a boy asks if it was worth it. You pose. What? The punishment. He says. Did you deserve it? You think about the grain, the timing, the clause you didn't read. You shrug. That's not what matters. What matters is whether you write something you're willing to wear on your skin. He nods. You suspect he understands more than you ever did. Over time, your scar fades, but never disappears. People still ask to see it. You allow it. You even joke. Sometimes, I'm my own receipt. When you die years later, quietly, alone, they preserve your robe, stylus, and wax prints. Your tombstone reads, "Here lies the most accurate footnote in the empire." And for once, the words are enough. The summons is written in blue ink. That alone tells you it's serious. In the Persian bureaucratic hierarchy, Black is for tax disputes. Red is for treason. And blue soft, serene blue, is reserved for matters of the soul. You don't remember selling your soul. Not explicitly. But the letter says your moral ledger is out of balance. That's how the Zoroastrian auditors phrase it. You are, apparently, in violation of cosmic symmetry. You sigh and pack a bag. No point arguing with philosophy armed with forms. They bring you to the Hall of Ethical Debts, which sounds like a minor temple annex, but turns out to be a massive stone amphitheater carved into a mountain, lined with fire altars and cold stairs. Here, surrounded by ascetic judges and metaphysical accountants, you're told you owe 32 ethical units. You ask what that means. They explain that over the years you've accumulated misdeeds impatience with elders, casual sarcasm, selling slightly stale walnuts without labeling them. Each action has a karmic cost. And yours. It's enough to require rectification by witness flame. They lead you into a chamber filled with 7 oil braziers, each representing a different virtue truth: duty, restraint, charity, reverence, patience, and humility. You must sit beside each flame, one by one, and allow a rotating council of witnesses, elders, victims, neighbors, even a former lover, to stand across from you and recount your specific failures under that virtue. You may not interrupt. You may not justify. You must only listen. I feel the warmth of the fire, and let the ash settle on your clothes. The first flame is truth. A former market partner appears, wrinkled and tight-lipped. She says, "You once lied about a grain shipment delay to save face." You nod. She lists 3 more falsehoods, each small, each perfectly remembered. You flinch when she says your smile was insincere. The brazier crackles. Next is duty. A neighbor describes how you promised to help him repair a wall and never showed. You had, admittedly, to forgotten, but he didn't. He talks for 20 minutes about bricks and betrayal. The flame hisses as if in agreement. Restraint brings forth your cousin, who once loaned you a goat and received it back thinner than when it left. You let it eat dates. He accuses. You admit it. The goat liked dates. She became picky. He adds. She wouldn't eat barley for a month. The flame flares. You bow your head, under charity. You face a widow who reminds you of a time you turned her away when she asked for dried apricots during a famine. You claimed they were spoiled. They weren't. You were hoarding. She holds out her palm, and you place 3 apricots into it, now withered and symbolic. She nods, forgives, leaves. Reverence is harsher. A priest you once mocked for mumbling through a prayer reads a sacred verse with deliberate clarity. You cannot look at him. You feel the flame's heat rise, like judgment made tactile. You feel small. Then comes patience. A child you once scolded for spilling ink steps forward. Now, grown. He recounts the sting of your words. You apologized. Then, you apologize again now. The flame glows softer. The last brazier is humility, and it brings the mirror. No witnesses, no accusers. Just you and your reflection, surrounded by flame and silence. You sit, alone, for 1 hour. You watch yourself think. Watch yourself squirm. You find it harder than all the others combined. There is nowhere to hide. Historians still argue whether this ritual was more theater than theology, but participants always leave changed, humbled, calibrated, softened. You emerge with soot-streaked robes and blistered dignity. You are declared balanced, but not clean. You must now serve 32 days as an ethical scribe, recording the confessions of others. You sit under a canopy near the central square, with a papyrus roll, a clay seal, and a sympathetic nod. People line up: men, women, children, soldiers, tax collectors. Each whispers a fault. You write it down. They sigh in relief. You do not judge. You merely observe. One day, a boy confesses to spitting in his tutor's ink pot. You laugh. He does not. You stop laughing. Another man admits to stealing figs. A woman says she once prayed for her neighbor's infertility. Someone else says nothing, only weeps. You record that too. Silence counts. Your scroll grows long. The ink runs out. They give you more. After 32 days, you're released. No robe, no title, no reward, just a parchment with your name, a date, and a line balanced. You hang it above your bed, not proudly, but quietly. Years pass. You find yourself speaking less, judging less. You spend more time beside fires, warming your hands, remembering what each flame meant. You carry dried apricots in your pocket, just in case. One evening, a stranger asks for directions. You answer patiently, kindly, then offer him half your bread. He thanks you, calls you teacher. You're not, but you don't correct him. At night, you sometimes whisper the 7 virtues aloud, not as prayer, as reminder. And when the wind passes through your home, rattling lamps and parchment, you smile. It sounds like balance. And now, it's time to let the fires fade. Let the tribunals dim. The echoes of oaths and judgments hush beneath the blanket of sleep. Picture those Persian halls, now empty scrolls rolled tight, inkpots capped, braziers cooling to soft embers. The echoes of sandals on polished floors have gone quiet. The executioner has set down his spear. The priest has extinguished the sacred flame. Even the scales, so precise and trembling, have settled into perfect stillness. You breathe. Outside the citadel walls, the desert stretches on wide, calm, endless. The moon hangs heavy above Persepolis, spilling its silver across crumbling steps and weathered stones. No cries, no punishments, no contracts remain. Only the hush of wind across marble columns and the gentle flutter of a linen curtain swaying by candlelight. You step out onto the terrace. There's no audience now, no ledger, no need to pronounce anything correctly. You speak only in thoughts, in feelings, in quiet understanding. Let the stories dissolve now, like smoke through an incense ring, curling up into the stars. You've walked through fires, faced mirrors, bowed before impossible laws. And yet, here you are, breathing, whole, unmeasured. So settle your body into stillness. Let your heart beat slow. Let the ghosts of punishment slip away, their scrolls unspooled and floating like ash. You are safe. You are forgiven. And at least tonight, you won't be audited. Sweet dreams.